States. We're addicted to it. I mean, we're totally stuck on it. If it doesn't make me feel good, I'm not going to do it. In fact, be honest, most of us who are here today chose this church because something about it made us feel good. Okay? And most people who decide to leave a church do so because something about it made them feel bad. That's what our life is all about. We have made all of our decisions on whether it makes us feel good or bad. Everything. Who you spend time with, what job you end up doing, where you go to church, what school you go to, what car you drive, it's all about what makes me feel good. But here's the trick. If God wired us that pleasure is our number one motivator, perhaps there's a reason for it. Perhaps He wanted it that way. Jot this down. If pleasure is the number one motivator, God must want it in our life. If pleasure is the number one motivator, God must want it in our life. We're going to talk about pleasure today, and this is a tough one. You see on the note sheet here, there's a passage of Scripture, Galatians 6, 7 through 8. We've looked at it a number of times over this series, this Momentum series. It says, "Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Whoever sows to please their flesh, from the flesh will reap destruction. Whoever sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life." There's a pleasure thing going on in there, and there's a consequence thing going on in there. And if we please ourselves, if we pursue pleasure for ourselves, that leads us to a path of destruction. Now that is a really scary place to be. But if God wired us to have pleasure as our number one motivator, there's got to be something there that we need to understand. You tracking with me? Maybe if we opened up the Bible, we'd be able to see what pleasure really should be part of our life and how we should view it. So would you go with me to Ecclesiastes? This is in the Old Testament. If you're using the Bibles we passed out, it's on page 464. And we're going to Ecclesiastes chapter 2. We're going to read verses 1 through 11. But as soon as you get there, I want you to start all the way back at the beginning of Ecclesiastes, first chapter. We're going to look at a couple verses there, and then we're going to jump into the real section, okay? So Ecclesiastes, page 464-ish, chapter 1, verse 1 says this: "The words of the teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem." Who knows who that is? You guys remember who David's son is? His name is Solomon. He's the result of David's affair with Bathsheba, eventually killing her husband and marrying her, and then the second son they have together is Solomon. So God transforms the sinful character of this family to be something that He can use for His great goodness, all because David repents back in that moment in time, and God can then turn, since David turns around, God can turn the situation around and make something good. And so now Solomon is writing a book of our Bible. The teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem. Verse 2, this is helpful, this is really encouraging. "Meaningless. Meaningless," says the teacher. "Utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. What does man gain from all his labor at which he toils under the sun?" See, I call this guy a pessimist. He is not happy. He is not experiencing the joy of life. Everything to him is empty and meaningless. The old King James says vanity. Everything is vanity, which just means it might have something on the surface, but it's empty underneath. This guy is not having a good day. Why? What's his problem? What's going on under the surface? Well, now let's go to chapter 2. He tells us his journey. He says, "I thought in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good. But that also proved to be meaningless. Laughter," I said, "is foolish, and what does pleasure accomplish? I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly, my mind still guiding me with wisdom. I wanted to see what was worthwhile for men to do under heaven during the few days of their lives. I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired men and women singers and a harem as well, the delights of the heart of man. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all this my wisdom stayed with me. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my work, and this was the reward for all my labor. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I'd toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. He's a Debbie Downer. I mean, everything works out to just being bad, right? If you keep reading Ecclesiastes, we're going to read a number of sections from it, but if you keep reading it, there's a lot of seeming depression in there. But he keeps saying this phrase over and over, my wisdom stayed with me, which means that through the depression and through his just indulgent lifestyle, his Tiger Woods style lifestyle, through that, his wisdom stays with him, and he sees how empty it is. And he sees the truth mixed up in all this stuff, and he's going to reveal that truth to us just a little bit at a time. We're going to see some of it. But here's the first thing I want you to write down when it comes to this lesson of pleasure. It's that pleasure is never the answer. Pleasure is never the answer. Perhaps you've tried it. Maybe you were one of those who was in college and you were like, hey, I'm just going to indulge. I'm just going to, follow my heart's desire. I'm just going to, if it looks good, I'm going to do it. If it feels good, I'm going to do it. If it tastes good, I'm going to eat it or drink it or whatever. I'm just going to live with pleasure. I'm just going to indulge. Maybe you've been there. If you have been there, then you would probably be interested in telling the other people you know how empty it is. Because ultimately, pleasures go away. I can experience the greatest meal in my life today, but what about tomorrow? There's another lesson about pleasure. Take a look at Ecclesiastes 1:8. It's printed on your note sheet also. It says, everything is wearisome beyond description. I can't even describe how terribly tedious this whole life is, he's saying. No matter how much we see, we are never satisfied. No matter how much we hear, we are not content. Here's the next blank to write down. Pleasure is an appetite. This is really important. It's really important for you and I to realize this. Pleasure is an appetite. Like I said, if I eat lunch today, does that mean I'm good for tomorrow? Does that mean I'm good for the rest of the week? No, I need to eat tomorrow too. I need to eat the next day because it's an appetite. Appetites, by their very nature, keep coming back. By their very nature, they keep coming. Now, here's the lie we tell us. You're looking at that piece of cake. Yeah, I know. It might be chocolate cake for you. Maybe it's angel food cake for you. Maybe it's cheesecake for you. Maybe you hate cake altogether. And for you, it's like, I don't know, a grape and carrot smoothie. I don't even know. But for you, something in the world of food is like pleasurable to you. And so you're looking at that thing. It's there. And there's a lie that you tell yourself. And the lie goes like this. Listen carefully. It says, if I eat it, I will be satisfied. Right? Or you're looking at your computer and there's that flashing ad and you're like, if I click on it, I will be satisfied. How many of you have ever gone to like a place like Wikipedia or something, and like an hour later you've clicked on all these different articles and you've read lots of stuff that should never apply to your life, but you've just sort of been distracted? Am I the only one who does that? Maybe okay, at least one of my electric guitarists over here. Okay, we're bright people. So anyway, maybe you've done it for some other, I don't know, some other website. Maybe it's just your email, your Facebook. You're watching all these people, but you say this lie to yourself. If I click that link, I'll be satisfied. And then there's other links. And there's more food. And there's another pleasurable opportunity. And they just keep coming. And we keep lying to ourselves and we say, if I just do that, I'll be satisfied. But we're not. It's a lie. It's empty. Something, even though we're wired for pleasure, something in the pleasures we get leaves us hollow. Let's look at another passage here, Ecclesiastes chapter 5, just a couple pages over. 5:18 through 20. Look at this. He says, "Then I realized that it is good and proper for a man to eat and drink and to find satisfaction in his toilsome labor under the sun during the few days of life God has given him. For this is his lot. Moreover, when God gives any man wealth and possessions and enables him to enjoy them, to accept his lot and be happy in this, in his work, this is a gift of God. He seldom reflects on the days of his life because God keeps him occupied with gladness of heart." This is weird. He's still pessimistic, right? You can see some of the negativity in his heart. You can still see under his toilsome labor under the sun during the few days of life God has given him. But in the midst of this, there's some really interesting insights. The first thing is that it's good for people to be satisfied with their food and their drink, with pleasure. And then at the end, he says, and to accept his lot and be happy in his work, this is a gift of God. And then the last verse is like, he doesn't have any regrets. He doesn't even spend any time thinking about his past because God keeps him occupied with gladness of heart. There's a pleasure that comes from God that is satisfying. Go ahead and write this down. Pleasure with satisfaction comes from God. Pleasure with satisfaction comes from God. Let's go back a little bit, because in everything that Ecclesiastes says, and there's some fascinating things. There's another passage, just jot down the address. You can go there if you have the time. It's in Ecclesiastes 9, 7 through 10. Ecclesiastes 9, 7 through 10. Read that sometime this week. But Ecclesiastes, by and large, just says the same kind of stuff over and over again. He's pessimistic. He's tried pleasure. But in the midst of all that, there's this sense, there's this underlying desire that there's got to be satisfaction. There's got to be a God who wired me up this way who can provide that gift to me. Somehow it's got to work that way. So there's the key passage, a very important passage, back in chapter 3. So go ahead and flip back just a little bit. Chapter 3 is the famous chapter in Ecclesiastes. You know, there's a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven. A time to be born, a time to die, and that stuff. So anyway, we're going to look at another verse, not those ones. We're looking at verses 11 through 14. Check this out. Verse 11. He, talking about God, He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set